Welcome to The Truth in His Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today, I have the privilege, the distinct privilege. I mean, when you're able to go across the pond and have a conversation, it's a privilege. I'm speaking with a London-based painter and writer on abstract painting and also a curator. Please welcome Charley Peters. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Rob. It's lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you here. I think this is going to be fun and kind of a long time coming. We both had, some stuff we were able to organize and make this happen. So I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, same. We've been trying to organize this for such a long time. I've been really looking forward to having a chat today.
Absolutely. And I love that we have this doesn't help anyone that's listening, but I love that you have like your painting, your work in the background. I'm kind of marking out right now because there's so many we'll talk about it. I just see it. I'm like, this is great. But let's start off really general speaking. Can you give me the Charley Peters story? What's the story? How'd you get started in the arts? Tell me about that. The you getting started in the arts, kind of like growing up, and maybe that first experience with like arts, whether it is consuming it, whether it is like, hey, I used to doodle when I was in grade school. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if we go back to like the year zero, I think if you asked me as a kid what I wanted to do when I was an adult, it would be an artist. If you ask me now what I wanted to do as an adult, it's still being an artist. I feel very lucky that I've had quite a straightforward route through life. I've always known exactly what I've wanted to do. As a kid, the thing I loved doing most of all was sitting in my bedroom drawing. And, the favorite things for me to draw as a kid would be, like a lot of kids, like dinosaurs, robots, spaceships, like explosions, lightning bolts, which is pretty much, if you ask me to describe what I do now, it's probably not too far away from that, but with a little bit of kind of learned knowledge about abstract painting thrown in along the way. So I always describe my paintings as abstraction for people that watch too much TV. And that kind of sums up like most of my visual experiences through life. As a kid, I spent a lot of time by myself. I was very shy kid. Like I didn't really know how to talk to or relate to anyone until I was about 25. Like I'm not even kidding, which is weird because now I'd never shut up. But I think I've just held quite a lot of that chat back until later in life. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I was very introspective, very quiet, loved nothing more than just being left alone in my room, drawing, painting, being creative, making weird little bits of shit out of paper that probably nobody else would ever look at or be interested in. But for me, it was my whole world. And I think that's the beauty of creativity in a way, is that it gives you the opportunity to make your own worlds and put them out there to share with other people. It's a really good way of communicating with others and also talking about who you are in a kind of expanded context, I think.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And there's some similarities. It's interesting when I speak with someone and, people assume like, oh, you're a podcast. That's all you do is just talk. And I was like, no, I'm still like, I'm 37. I'm still very shy. And like, I'm 6'4". So it's hard for me to hide when I'm out. So I'm like, is there like a bus I can hide behind so I can avoid this social interaction that I'm not comfortable with right now?
Yeah, isn't that funny that I think a lot of creative people are like that? I think we present as being quite gregarious because we have to like kind of put ourselves out there and share such a lot about what we do every day. But I think inherently a lot of us are kind of introverts and are much more comfortable being left in our own spaces. It's this is ridiculous, a bit of an aside, and it's a bit ridiculous. Like I tried to learn to play the piano about like 5 years ago because it's like I've always wanted to do it. And I loved like practicing in my bedroom at home, and I'd be the best pianist. Oh my God, the best bedroom musician ever. It was like fucking Beethoven coming out of my keyboard. But as soon as I went into a lesson, I couldn't play a thing because there was someone else in the room. And it just made me realize that there's such a difference between different types of creative forms. And some people are much more overtly performative and sort of, I would say extroverted and able to turn that on. And some of us, we need to do it in our own time when we're ready. So we need to schedule a podcast to talk to people, or we need to make a painting and show it to people when we're ready for people to see it. And I think, yeah, definitely I'm definitely on the introvert spectrum, although I think a lot of people would be quite surprised to hear me say that, because they're used to hearing me talk quite a lot. And I suppose I've got quite a lot of energy and I'm quite chatty, but I'm also equally happy just being left alone to be quiet in my studio.
Yeah. I've done, and this is an aside, but in the same vein, we're just free jazzing it right now. We're just having a chat. Yeah. And it's interesting because I run into this thing where I'm doing these, I'm trying to stretch outside of purely doing podcasts. I had this I guess the way of describing it yesterday, speaking with a creative director, and people talk about stay in your lane. So it's like, oh, you just do this. I was like, no, my lane is very wide. It's multiple lanes. I don't have one lane. And, it's just wide enough to fit me in it, is the way I kind of put it. And I started doing like movie screenings and post movie talks and so on. And that performance piece you mentioned, I have to be more cognizant of it, because it's like, I can do this. And when we were isolated, COVID and all, I didn't feel like I missed anyone, because I was always able to just hop on here and talk to people. But in doing the movie kind of screenings, it's a public thing, and I'm presenting it to a group of people. So it's like a screening followed by a talk, and it's more of a curated conversation around subject matter with someone from the local art scene, but subject matter related to the movie. So there's something baked in it that it works, right? But it's still like, you're not like emoting in a way or presenting in a way that's very audience oriented. It's kind of like you're just having a podcast, but with people around.
Yeah. And I think being able to like control that for people that are a bit more introspective is really important. But I think that's why doing things like podcasts, like what you do, is really good, because in a way you're encouraging people that might otherwise not be sharing what they do to share it with a wider audience. And I think that's really valuable. It's part of, I think, we were just talking about this before we came on air. It's kind of like an artist's responsibility, I think, in terms of like social engagement, is to be able to share what we do every day. We're in a privileged position, those of us that go through life, being able to have a job that we love. Yeah. And being able to share that with others is really important to me, definitely.
Absolutely. 100%. So I want to touch back on, that piece you mentioned about growing up and just kind of enjoying drawing and being in your room and that. So so talk about, if you will, like how that maybe family influence kind of like helps you early on in your art career, like even in the nascent stages of kind of developing it. And like, are you fostering kind of a similar environment within the scene that you're in as an adult with maybe other artists who are early on in their career of, hey, here's the nudge, or hey, have you checked this out? Or hey, have you gone to this gallery? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, going back to the family thing, I think that's probably quite interesting, because although my family aren't creative people at all, and as I think is maybe the case with quite a lot of artists, if you ask them what their parents wanted them to do, being an artist is definitely not up there. People generally think people's parents want you to be a surgeon or a lawyer or like a proper job. And although I think maybe my mum is quite a creative person, she's not in an educated way, like she did sewing and stuff. But I can see how, although there wasn't much support for me having a career as an artist, my family setup as a kid completely contributed to, I suppose, my love of just being alone drawing. So my mum left home when I was about 7, and I was already kind of destroyed by shyness at that point. And I went completely even further into myself and couldn't really connect with anybody else. And so the things that gave me pleasure as a kid were reading books, looking at pictures, loved watching cartoons. And I've mentioned this before. I think I was quite a kind of fantastically minded kid. I wasn't particularly in touch with reality for quite a lot of my childhood. And I thought cartoons were real for a really long time. Like, I thought there was 2 different worlds that we could live in. There was the one where the people looked a bit like you and me, and there was the one where everyone had like black outlines and looked much cooler. And I always wanted to be in that world. And I can remember someone telling me, and it might have been a parent trying to ground me in reality like they do and basically ruin your fun, when I was about 8 or 9. And they're like, well, that's not real. What's wrong with you? And I remember being absolutely mortified when I found out. It's like, oh my God, I can never be the black outline person that I wanted to be. But I can see that I was just so consumed by that world, because I spent a lot of time by myself, and I was probably quite lonely and upset at the fact that my mum wasn't there,
Right.
that it's completely informed the person that I became. You know, it's how I spent all my time, and it's where all my fun came from, as these kind of invented magical spaces that I would watch on TV. And then later, like in video games, again, like sort of those fantastical worlds that are almost better than your real life.
I love it. I love it.
So I can see that, like, although there wasn't like a helping hand from my family to make me an great artist, the way my life was set up and the way that things transpired definitely informed how I probably had no choice other than to carry on being in a room by myself making weird things.
Yes. Yeah, I think going back, we as a kid, we didn't have a lot of money or what have you, but we never got this idea that we were broke. You know, that was a really good thing for my parents or what have you. And for me, it was like I had an uncle that I had never met. He passed before I was born, and he was like an artist. He was like, you know, did a lot of commercial work, but he was a painter. And it was just like, you know, my parents, my relatives were like, oh, yeah, you're going to kind of pick this up. You got an uncle. And I was like, I never met him. So how do you? And I was just drawing like X-Men and things of that nature. I would rush through a test just to draw. And, you know, I would get into a little trouble because people didn't get it. And, you know, teachers are like, oh, he's not doing the test. I was like, no, I'm doing it. I'm just doing it very quickly and taking my B, whereas I probably should get an A, but I didn't care. And I just remember, you know, my parents either buying me like just the tools, the color pencils, the paint, just different things as a kid to try to help with that. But also it's like, we would like for you to be in your room. So if you could just hang out in your room, it was like a back way of doing it. Like, here's the carrot, the art carrot in your room. Go get it.
Oh, that's really cool. I mean, it sounds quite similar, doesn't it? It's like different circumstances, but a similar kind of vibe. And I think maybe that's where a lot of like creativity comes from, just people having the time with themselves. Because I think that's really important. And it's what a lot of people don't have time for in contemporary life. You know, we live such busy lives now that actually having that time out to just be with yourself and to see what comes out is really important. And again, artists that have like spaces where they can come to work and just have that quiet time, I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, I think like there is a practice that I do, and I want to ask you about your process in a bit. But there's a practice that I do that kind of just gets the gunk out. Like sometimes I get a little just in my own head about questions that I'm coming up with, because I try to have unique questions. I try to do that deep dive. It might be a little online stalking of a person just to come up with, hey, you're not going to remember this. You wrote this in this interview, or you did this piece. And I find sometimes when I feel like I'm either recycling the same questions or that I don't really have anything, I take a walk. I just kind of do that reset, and because I'm always observing things, and I'm able to put on like some really obnoxious headphones, and no one's going to bother me because they'll see them. And then I can like, oh, okay, yeah, I should come up with this. And often I'm listening to audiobooks about like art or about like human behavior to kind of get like more close to bedrock, not asking like that surface level. So tell me about your work, but really, what's the thinking that goes into the work? What is embedded in that work that people often miss? What's the threads that bring the work together? That's the thing that really interests me. And I think realizing that you walk everywhere because it helps you come up with ideas. It helps you think. It helps you get some of that gunk out of there. Because, you know, going back to it, during the beginning of like the pandemic and for the better part of a year, I was kind of just in my own juices. So you're not able to connect with other people to overhear conversations and maybe get reference points that could lead to a different way of thinking or a different way of approaching a podcast or questions, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I completely can relate to that going for a walk thing. I mean, I live in London, so it's not like I can go for a nice quiet walk in the country. So when I do go for a walk, it's a fairly stimulating experience. There's generally noise, smells, lights, stuff everywhere. But actually, I like that. You know, I like there to be a lot of stuff going on. For me, going for a walk is the same. Like if I sit in my studio or at home or wherever I am trying to think of an idea, nothing will come. I have to go out and not think. And it's really hard to do that when you're in a workspace. So I do the same. I go for a walk. And what I do is I carry around a pack of Post-it notes, and I almost do like sort of automatic drawing or writing as I'm walking, and a thing comes into my head. Then I'll just draw a squiggle or a shape or something, and then I can make sense of that later.
Yeah.
But it's the same. That's the kind of head gunk thing. And I think for me, head gunk is logical thought. It's trying to be creative. It's trying to think of an answer or a solution to a problem. The problem being a project or a painting or, you know, a podcast question or whatever. Yeah. And I think if I try to be clever and intelligent and creative, it's rubbish. I can't do it. I have to not try. And it's really hard to learn that as an adult, I think, particularly maybe when you've been to art school and you're sort of, you know, you're trained in a particular way. But for me, the biggest lesson in being creative is to not try to be creative. It's just to empty your head. It's what Agnes Martin said about turning your back to the world and just letting stuff come in. It's kind of meditative, but it's meditation for people with ADHD, you know, that actually can't meditate like me. You know, it's just the best way to clear my head is to go out into a really noisy bit of London, and somehow other stuff comes in that's cool.
I'll get on the treadmill, which I hate because I'll do like the highest incline. I was like, all right, fat guy, let's make it happen. And as I'm sweating, I find that I'm pulling out the phone. Like usually I try to keep something analog. I'll keep a notepad with me or something. And if I'm walking, but something like that is like, I'm listening to this. I need this right now. It's the only way I'm going to make it through this task of basically hiking. And but I'll pull out the notes, and I have that note app like preloaded because I know that it's stimulating it. The treadmill is stimulating these ideas, and the nature of what I'm listening to, maybe it's Austin Kleon's book, or the 3 books that have them together, or something like super old. Like, let me listen to something from Dale Carnegie. We're going like 1920s, 1930s. And it's like, all right, because we lose stuff over time. We lose how we go about things. So it's going to jog something. And I think I incorporate that in my process. Hell, I wrote a grant recently. I wrote for a grant recently, and they were like, so what do you want to use this for? And I had Audible in there because it's that much part of my process now. So with it, I want to talk about process a little bit. Like in the most general terms, like, could you describe like the process of like starting a new project or what have you, but in terms of what is like one of the first things you're doing? What is something that's like in the middle? And, you know, I know this thing about painters, it's they're not really done. They kind of just stop painting. They're kind of like, I'm not gonna paint anymore. So tell me about something that's, you know, informative towards like the end that you're like, okay, I think I'm good. I think I'm good with this one. All right, one more brush stroke. I think I'm good.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it sort of taps into a bit of what we were just saying. Like, to begin with, I can't start with an idea. I never, in the studio anyway, it's a little bit different when I do sort of like public facing artworks where people need to see a proposal before they give me the money. But like, if we just talk about what I do in the studio, where I can pretty much please myself, I generally can't start with an idea of what a painting is going to look like. So it's not like, I'm trying to do a painting about this, or, I'm going to have these motifs or these shapes or whatever in it. I just have to start by putting colour on a canvas, and all my paintings start just with a layer of colour. And I think in terms of colour temperature, usually, so is it going to be hot or cold, or is it going to be like kind of moody and dark or bright and poppy? And then that will then sort of set a tone or a sensibility for what the rest of the painting is going to be, which I then respond to. So for me, to start anything or to kind of move paintings on, it's much more like a kind of action reaction process rather than a kind of cognitive thought and then I do something, if that makes sense. So I always start with colour. Yeah. And then generally the middle bit of a painting is, I would say, absolute chaos, stress, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, changing things as I go as well. Although my paintings look quite precise when they're finished, actually there's a lot of decision making that happens in real time, and there's a lot of things that I change as I go through. So you can see on the surface of the painting where I've painted over things. They're not as kind of slick and graphic as you might think they are when you just see them on screen. They're definitely physical things. And for me, like, the end of the painting, it's almost like a massive relief, because generally when I don't know what I'm doing and where it's going, there's a lot of stress related to that, although it's a kind of stress that I'm clearly addicted to because I keep doing it. And it's almost like a kind of sense of physical relief when I stand back from a painting and I think, oh, actually, it's nicely balanced. It feels like there's nothing else I need to do. There's the right amount of stuff going on in the right bits of the canvas. It almost feels like a kind of physical thing where it's almost like I can just breathe out for the first time. Because during those moments of like indecision and chaos and uncertainty while I'm painting, it feels like I'm holding my breath the whole time.
Yeah.
But there's a tension there. And it's quite like, oh my God, I can't really sleep properly until it's done. But then when it is done, it's like, oh, thank God, like that makes sense now. It's kind of like organizing chaos from beginning, middle to end.
I love it. And I was hearing intuition in there of like, yeah, I'm making changes during the course. This is going to sound ridiculous. I think you named my autobiography in there in the earlier bit, and you said moody and dark. And I was like, yeah, I'm moody and dark. I can make that happen. People tell me how cheerful and bright I am. I was like, I don't know, I'm moody and dark. But also there is an element of work and stress that stuff that comes off the shoulders. So I'm wearing my Apple Watch right now. That is not a plug, but I'm wearing my Apple Watch right now, and I'll look at the number of calories I've burned before a podcast. And then over the course of it, I'll look at what I burned during the podcast. And I'm literally just sitting here having a conversation. Sometimes I'll burn 200 calories during like a 30-minute interview. And I'm like, is that a thing? Am I really putting out this much energy and exertion for... And I mean, there is some gesticulating, but really there's not a lot of movement that happens here. So it may be just that stress that just has me going of wanting to do well, wanting to ask questions, and maybe laughing because sometimes you artist types say things that are hilarious. But it's interesting to me of that tension that's baked in when you're going through it, because I have another interview later today, and the guest was like, I'm super nervous. And I was like, oh, I am too. I always tell her, I was like, I'm nervous about any one of these things because, often I don't meet anyone before doing these interviews. So there's a fair amount of, I don't know what we're going to get out of this, like that chaos that you described somewhere in the middle. And sometimes like people, show that they're nervous in a way that shows me or gives me this sense that, oh, you don't like me. But then other people are like, oh, you're great. This is fun. This is amazing. But I don't know usually until the very end.
Yeah. But I think that's part of the creative process though, isn't it? Being able to kind of like read the room. And by that, I mean, like what you do is like reading like a relationship between the two of us and how we're relating and how we're talking. But for me, like reading is looking at canvas and understanding what's on it and what needs to change and what can come next. And the problem is with all these situations, there's infinite variables, which can be quite stressful because uncertainty breeds anxiety, I think.
Yes.
But it's also, maybe that's the little bit that's addictive and that keeps us going. Maybe that's where like the dopamine's from, the excitement of, although I don't know what it is I'm doing, I'm completely in control. And actually, once you realize you can do exactly what you want and no one's going to tell you otherwise, that's great, right?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. So I got one last real question, and then I got those great rapid fire questions that everyone loves. Even if they say otherwise, everyone loves them. So when you're making work, whether it's something that's more commission oriented or something that is for like, that's for you ultimately, that you're like, I'm doing this, I make the rules here. What sort of considerations are being made there? Are you considering the viewer in any way? Are you considering obviously I would imagine you're considering maybe the time that goes into it, but what are some of the considerations that you're making and what role do they play in the process?
Yeah, so for work that's like commissioned and you're getting paid up front to do something, which might be a work on canvas that a collector wants, or it might be like a mural or something that's more like a kind of public artwork, then I would say I do consider or try to consider how an audience might respond to it, because I think there's a sense of responsibility there that you're getting paid to do something that's for somebody else. And, although I would be commissioned because people know what my work looks like, and I would think that I have some freedom within that, those projects are very different to where I'm just making paintings in the studio for a show. And generally, I don't consider what anyone else is thinking. I just make those and work it out as I go. So there's two different types of working that I think I have to do.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, even though I'm thinking about how an audience might relate to it, how much that kind of really changes what I would do as well. I think we have a lot of kind of license within the work that we make, even within in a sort of public sphere. And a lot of it can be post-rationalized, which I don't think is cheating. I think that's okay, because I think generally we don't know what we're doing until we've done it.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Because when I'm doing this and I'm putting it out, and I think with social media, people could just tell me, "Oh, I didn't like that as much," or "Now I have questions," and so on. And at times, I just try to disable the comments because I'm not doing it for that purpose. I'm just doing it because I think the conversation is interesting, and maybe someone can take something out of it. Or and also, self-serving is for me. It's like, hey, I want to talk to Charley Peters. Let's have a conversation. And I think I get something out of that because I steal from you all the time. I steal from you creative types to make me a better creative. But I don't do it for that purpose. I do it for the love of the conversation and the love of kind of like diving into process-oriented things and understanding what artists are thinking about, understanding what interesting people are thinking about. But if I went through and said, all right, because I do some commission work as well for clients, and that is a much different situation. And I definitely relate it to, you're hiring me for a reason. You can hire anyone, to do this conversation. Like, it's either something about the way that I approach it or something about me as a personality, my work ultimately, that you want to have your brand associated with, your business associated with. So otherwise, why would you do it? So it's like, where is that line? How far does that go of what the client wants, at least from my perspective, what the client wants, what they're looking for versus why they want it from me?
Yeah. And you know what? I also think it's you never can control how people are going to perceive your work or understand it or respond to it, because so much about how we all read what we see comes from us. It's not even about the object that we're looking at. We're all informed by our own life experiences, our own anxieties, our own weird little personality quirks. And I don't know everybody that's going to see a piece of work that I make, and I wouldn't want to second guess how they're going to interpret it either. And in a way, I think that's not my responsibility. I can have a kind of general sense of duty of care for making a piece of work that's good and that adds kind of some cultural value to the world, or to the environment in which it's seen. But I can't control how people see it, whether they like it, whether they're offended by it, whether they read it in a way that I didn't intend them to, or whether they get an idea that I might have had. And generally, actually, I don't work with ideas. So maybe with what I do, it's a bit more simple. I'm not a conceptual artist. I make stuff that is generally, it's a visual experience, or it's like a sensory experience. It's not something that necessarily has clever ideas in it. But I think if you're too led by what your audience might be wanting or expecting, I don't know, I think that's a bit of a kind of weird sort of little wormhole that you go into, and it's really hard to get out of and actually even make anything after that. You can't control what people think.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're at this point. I think it's a good point for us to stop and get into some rapid fire questions. And because I have to, I think I may incorporate this in as a soundbite, telling people, no, don't overthink them. Don't never overthink them. They're goofy questions. They're fine. And whatever pops in your head, the first thing that pops in your head. So I think I got 5 of them for you. What is your favorite color to work with?
Oh gosh, I like cold colours. So I think I would say a kind like somewhere between the blue-green spectrum, probably erring more on the green, like a teal or a turquoise.
The painting behind you, that's what's popping from, because I see all like sides of it, and I feel like it's, and I know nothing about color theory. I feel like it's right there in the middle, and thus I'm wearing like. People will say it's burgundy. I'm wearing ox blood because, royalty and the enemies I have and all of that stuff. So thank you. You mentioned cartoons earlier. That may be a cartoon-related question, just so you know. But what are you currently watching? What shows are you currently watching?
Oh, God, on TV. It's not a cartoon. So I'm about like 6 years later than everybody else. I'm working my way through Breaking Bad. So that's what I'm watching at the moment. And also, I don't know, I must have dared not say this out loud. I love Below Deck. I'm watching that. And my favourite lockdown programme, I watched almost every season of Law & Order SVU. That's probably my all-time favourite TV show. ever.
Have you started Organized Crime yet? I don't know if they have that over there in across the pond, but there's kind of like a spinoff called Organized Crime where Stabler's like the lead, and there is some like crossover between that and SVU and this other spinoff that was called Law and Order Hate Crimes, and I was like, all of these are just coming together. It's definitely bingeable television. It's just like, oh, this is not even an arc. This is Criminal of the Week. This is great.
I know, but why? I think a lot of creative people like kind of dark psychological stuff or crime fiction. And I don't know what that is, whether it's something to do with like problem solving or whether because we spend a lot of time in our own heads, we love all that kind of forensic sort of stuff. I don't know. But I loved it. And I watched like all 15 seasons of Criminal Minds as well over lockdown. I was like a proper, American TV crime thriller geek.
I'm here for it. I want there to be an opening because some of the openings in SVU were really funny and really kind of bad and cringy. I want it to be just podcast related. It's like, yeah, man, I'm doing this in the podcast studio. And then, hey, is that a Ruthie? Oh my gosh. And then suddenly it's just, I'm found dead. I don't know. I just want it to be something that has the setup of a podcast and all the corny stuff is in it. It's like, looks like he was strangled with his own microphone cable. I don't know.
There must have been a podcast episode. I can't think of it though, and I've seen them all.
Yes, I'm sure there was. I mean, and there's a running bit that my partner and I do. If you watch enough like 80s or even like TV shows that have like a black kind of lead, like detective or black like sergeant, there's always a certain temperament. So the guy that's in the later seasons of SVU, we just send that picture to each other back and forth whenever we're having a bad day. And it's the look of, I don't give a shit. That's literally what it is.
Brilliant.
So this is actually the cartoon related question.
Oh, okay.
Which cartoon character do you relate to most?
Oh, God. Oh, no. And that's really hard, isn't it? I'm just trying to think. I'm just trying to think what that would be. Like maybe She-Ra.
Okay. And they did the reboot of that too on Netflix, I believe. So yeah, entirely. Same color hair. It works.
Exactly. It's the best thing I can think of off the top of my head.
I'm Skeletor. Just breaking mirrors, walking through them. Classic Skeletor, not current Skeletor. He's a little too buff.
Yeah. I like old school Skeletor better as well. Much cooler.
I'm dad bod Skeletor. That's kind of where I'm at right now. So literature. What is your favorite art-related book and your favorite non-art-related book?
Oh, God. I don't read much art-related stuff, I have to say. And I don't read fiction either. I find fiction really hard to read, really hard to relate to. So I'm a real sort of like non-fiction reader. Sure. But art books, I'm just trying to think what I would have read that I really liked. I mean, I have a PhD in fine art, so I should be able to rattle off about 1 million art books. Of course, I can't think of any. There's a really good book called The Infinite Line by Bryony Fair that I really like, and that is where she writes a lot about Eva Hesse and also Agnes Martin, and she writes in that book about repetition and minimalism. I really like that. And there's also a book called Pictures of Nothing by Kurt Vonnegut, which I really enjoy as well.
Nice.
So, and that is similar. Like he's talking about kind of that period in particularly American, like post-war art history, from like abstract abex through to like pop art and the relationship between all those different movements. So they're my two favorite books, and I have to say they're my favorite because they have lots of pictures in them. I hate an art book that's just writing. What's the point? Just show me the good stuff. So so they're both really good books with cool pictures in. So I'd recommend both of those to anybody. They're great. And then like favorite non-art books. I mean, I read a lot of, I suppose, stuff about psychology. I was telling you, I just come back off holiday, and the book I was reading on the beach this time last week is called The Wisdom of Psychopaths by Dr. Kevin Dutton. And that's really interesting. I read a lot of stuff about the way the mind works.
Yeah.
And it's not as grim as it sounds. Basically, he's saying that there's a lot of psychopathic traits that are actually could be quite useful in controlled, moderated portions in terms of helping us deal with the complexities of everyday life. So things like being more fearless, being more resilient, being more kind of disconnected emotionally from things in the way that helps us to make better decisions. So I find books like that really interesting, books about how we think.
Yeah, I need to find a way to get back to disconnecting emotionally, because I used to ride that wave a lot. And now it's just like, oh, I have feelings. Oh, get out of me.
And I feel suck, don't they? What's the point?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be just an Aquarius that just doesn't have feelings. I just need to be that again, just resting on those laurels.
I see, I'm Cancerian. I'm never going to get away from the feelings.
You're Cancer. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. So this is the last one, and people. So in this one, I may eventually. I'm gonna use your terms. Relegate. I might eventually relegate this question, but I think it's a good one. What was your last Google search?
Oh, yes, I'll tell you what it was. I was looking for, on YouTube, walkthroughs of Driver. Do you remember the old PlayStation game?
I do. Yeah.
So I'm doing a show next year that might be vaguely car / video game driving kind of related. So, yeah, before I popped online to chat to you, I was doing some searches, a little bit of kind of cursory research into Driver, that game.
That's great. That's the most wholesome, productive answer I've heard, because some people say I can't say what I was looking up, or because it was last Google search, or it was like, what was the last text you sent? And someone's like, that's even dirtier. I can't even talk about that one.
No, come on. I'm at work today. I was being purely in the work zone. And it's, in Britain, it's like 4:00 in the afternoon or something. We're just getting ready for cups of tea and sandwiches here. There's nothing less wholesome than that. Oh,
we have a place, it's called Tea Spot, or what have you, Emma's Tea Spot. And, the owner is English, or what have you, and just like, yeah, we're gonna have a proper cup of tea. I was like, this is great. Tell me more. And I go there to have the tiny sandwiches and everything is great. So with that being said, that's it. I want to thank you for being on the podcast and coming through and indulging me in all of my questions. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks, the listeners, where to check you out, your work, where to follow you out online, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Oh, okay, cool. So you can find out more about my work on my website, which is charleypeters.com. And I'm at Charley Peters on Instagram. And I'm just dabbling my little toes in TikTok. And I'm at Charley Peters Studio there. So please follow me there, because literally nobody else is.
So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Charley Peters for coming on to the podcast and spinning a yarn, having a chat with me. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art in and around your neck of the woods. You just have to look for it.